Welcome back, Whisky fans. Got another Jura today. I know. This is going to be the last one. At least the last one for probably a very long time. To be fair to Jura though, Jura is possibly, along with Dalmore and possibly Macallan, although I'll probably say only really equal to Dalmore, Jura is one of those distilleries that it's fashionable to hate. It's cool to have like a semi-edgy, although not really, because it's kind of the same thing that everyone's saying. But it's fashionable to hate on Jura these days. And I think a lot of that is kind of well-deserved. Like I've said before, they put out a lot of low-strength, artificially coloured, chill-filtered, 40%, barely trying crap. But as I've also said recently in a couple of reviews, I've reviewed the 10-year-old, which is fairly newish, from Jura, and their 14-year-old rye cask finish. I think that things are really starting to pick up. You can tell that it seems like they've kind of started to take whiskey production more seriously at Jura. For a long time they tried to get away with no age statement whiskies at low strength, relying on flogging them at probably high volumes in places like supermarkets, and for everything else they had a bad habit of slapping weird heavy-handed cask finishes onto a whiskey to try and add flavour into it to cover up the crap base spirit. And that even extends to some of the very, very pricey offerings in the Jura range. When you look at things like the 221 or whatever it was, and Tides and the 18-year-old, they've released a lot of pretty expensive whiskies lately with a piss-poor presentation. If you're going to slap a price tag of nearly £100 or more than £100 on a whiskey, these distilleries need to know that we expect a good presentation, at least 46% non-chill filtered natural colour. I'm sure that they do know these things, I'm sure that people tell them, but for whatever reason there's a lot of distilleries out there, and Jura is one of the most prominent offenders, where they think they can get away with it. And I'm kind of surprised if they do get away with it, because you guys, I'm sure you agree with me that there's a certain standard of presentation that we expect in a whiskey if we're paying top dollar for it. Anyway, we're not talking about those expensive Juras today, we're talking about this Jura Rum Cask finish. So as I said before, a lot of the more recent products in the Jura lineup I think are a significant step up from what we have been having. And this one here, to be fair to Jura, it's not one of their recent offerings. I've had this one for quite a long time. I don't even know if you can still get this. I think there probably is some of this still floating around. But I've had this bottle for, I think, a couple of years at least. And there's a couple of reasons why I wanted to review this now. One of them is because it kind of highlights my point about the improvements that I think we're having with the 10 and the rye cask in Jura at the moment. Because this really kind of epitomises to me the lazy style of whiskey making that Jura did have a few years ago. It's another reason why I wanted to review this one now, and that's because it's been kicking around on my whiskey shelf for quite a long time. Quite a layer of dust on this one, and I'm sick of looking at it. It's not too much of this one left, so hopefully I'm going to do a review of this one and get shot of it. Having a look at the specs and the presentation on this one, I think that the tube on this one, with that kind of tropical jungle, perhaps Caribbean theme, nice-ish. I think that the silver is a bit it's probably not quite as good as the 14-year-old rum cask. I think that one's a little bit nicer looking, but what it looks like doesn't really matter that much. But looking at the specs on this one, Jura Rum Cask, it is a no age statement release, so we only know that it is at least 3 years old. Also, and I don't think, as per the rye cask and probably the 10, it doesn't say anything about chill filtration or colouring on the bottle. You have to dig a little bit deeper than that. And again, on this rum cask finish, they've put it in medium grey on slightly light grey, so you can barely see it unless you're really looking, but it does say Zucca colour. It's artificially coloured. They are owning up to that, only in the languages where they're legally obliged to say so. If you only speak English and you don't know what these things mean, you would not know. Although, annoyingly, on the back label, it does actually talk about the rich golden amber colour on there. So, kind of takes the piss a bit that they're being dishonest and dumping a load of colouring into this and then going on about the colour. Also good to know that you've got that little symbol down there, which tells you that it's an effective contraceptive as well. I think that's what it means anyway. Other details that we know about this one, because it's 40%, it's almost guaranteed. I would bet money that this is pretty heavily chill filtered, because it is very clear. You can see almost straight through it, the level of detail, clarity on my fingernail there. It's, apart from the artificial colour, it's like looking through water, so definitely chill filtered. To their credit, they do give us a nice little rundown of what casks have been used for this one. On the front label it says maturation American white oak ex-bourbon barrels, and then it says cask finish rum casks. So that'll be why they've chosen to call it the Jura Rum Cask finish, probably. So to Jura's credit, obviously there's a lot of improvement to be done with Jura's range of whiskey, but at least they do tell us that this is a finished whiskey. They could just put rum cask on it and leave us guessing as to whether it's wholly matured or a married vatting of bourbon and rum or a finished whiskey, but they give us clear details on the label there that tell us that this is a rum finish. The more eagle-eyed of you out there will have probably also noticed that this is a big bottle. This is a 1 litre bottle. Here in the UK we normally get our 700ml bottles, but this is a full litre. Now we've seen a few of these. There's another Jura cask finish which I think is probably still available, it's been around for a while. There's a Jura red wine cask finish, and that's in a litre bottle as well. Now a lot of these litre bottles of Jura started to pop up around the start of when COVID really started to kick in. And my theory on this, and it's just a theory, is that these litre bottles were probably originally destined for duty free before COVID really slowed down international travel. Cask finishes are a very, and always have been, a very popular and easy way for a distillery to make an exclusive bottling for duty free, because the duty free industry quite often stipulates that they want an exclusive, something to draw people into the duty-free shop, something that you can't get anywhere else. And the easy way to do that is to get your standard whiskey, maybe not even full-term matured, just slap it into a whatever cask, and you've got a cheap, economical, often not very good, but unique cask finish. So I do wonder if that's why we're seeing these litre bottles. So let's get some in the glass. Cork closure. Standard kind of affair from Jura. Quite looking forward to recycling that one, so I don't have to see it every time I go to my whiskey shelf. Let's keep that out. We've paid for the label and the tube, so we might as well enjoy it. So, Jura Rum Cask finish. Possibly not as ridiculous a colour as the 14-year-old rye cask, actually. Looks like it might be a little bit paler, but still obviously fake tanned. Jura Rum Cask finish on the nose. So, can you smell those rum casks? I think you can. It's not hugely obvious, but there's definitely a kind of rum and raisin sweetness to the nose of this one. A little bit of a honeyed, just vague sweetness. I do think though that this is a prime example of what I've been going on about with the previous two Jura releases. Whereas those two are fairly innocent in this offence, this one, they've slapped that rum cask finish on this, and I do think that this is probably quite young stock from Jura, and that rum cask has really taken over You're not getting much of the Jura base spirit on this. It's really all about that vague, nondescript sweetness coming through from that rum cask. There is a tiny little hint of smoke on the nose of this one, although it's really a background note. A little bit of a tropical note, a little hint of pineapple. But apart from that sweetness, that rum raisin, vanilla honey, and a faint tropical fruit note, the nose is very simple and muted, and I'd even go as far to say as the nose is a little bit harsh and immature. So, in my opinion, classic signs of a reasonably rushed cask finish. Let's see how it tastes. On the palate, again, as per the nose, fairly simple. You have to kind of do quite a bit of work to find those flavours. There's, again, a sweetness on the palate, sweet and slightly smoky. Disappointingly, there's quite a cardboardy note on the palate of this one, which to me always signifies youth, immaturity. It's also a reasonably weak experience, quite weak and plain. There is a little bit of that trademark Jura peatiness on the palate, which I didn't really get on the nose of this one. So we're talking about that familiar musty and slightly dry vegetal peat, something that people often describe as a little bit like cabbage, boiled cabbage. I think there's also a little bit of a prickly spiciness on the palate of this one, and sadly I have to say that it's quite hot, especially for a whiskey that's presented at 40% ABV. I would say that not many whiskies, especially whiskies that are as plain and simple as this, have the amount of heat and bite that this one has at such a low strength. Let's have one more sip and look at the finish. So, as for the finish, sweet, young, immature, slightly spicy, but generally quite mild and one-dimensional. So as for a grade for this one, I'm going to go with, I almost didn't bother to give it a grade because I'm not recommending this at any price really, but I would go with a D-. So anyone that's not familiar with my grading scale, D- is basically the bottom end of not good. It's not awful, but there's just not much to recommend. I think that the problem here is exactly what I was complaining about with the past releases when I was doing the review of the Jura 10-year-old and the 14 rye cask, that it's more of that trademark corner cutting from Jura. I think that quite often rum casks are probably the number one cask when you want a cask other than bourbon that integrates seamlessly with bourbon casks. I think that rum casks, sort of counterintuitively, they are probably the closest thing that you can get to a bourbon cask, in that they often blend in with bourbon casks really seamlessly. They add that little extra dimension, but they really don't change anything too drastically. But I think that the cask finish on this one, it really adds little and improves nothing. I think that a lot of the flavour on this one that is there actually comes through from the Jura distillate itself, but even that, there's not enough there. All in all, I think this is a fairly unenjoyable dram that really seems quite immature, even for Jura. The whole experience is really rather weak and hollow, and as I said before, quite hot for 40%, surprisingly hot. Probably the only thing that I can commend Jura for on this whiskey is the level of transparency on the cask types, that they tell us that it is matured in bourbon casks and then finished in rum casks. But really, that's the selling point. I think that this is exactly the sort of lazy, cask-finished, immature spirit that has rightly angered a lot of potential Jura customers and ex-Jura customers. And it's the kind of unnecessary, sweet finish that puts me off a lot of those duty-free exclusives. Good news is, though, that if you are a Jura fan or an ex-Jura fan, then we have we have several other options now. We've got the 10-year-old, which it still needs work, but it's a very decent, recommendable entry-level whiskey from Jura. And we've also got the 14-year-old rye cask, which again, recommendable budget malt. Other than that, from the things that I've tried from Jura that are available at the moment, you probably need to be looking at independent bottles, because even the expensive stuff from Jura is really hit or miss. But hopefully this is the end of this lazy, cask finished, immature stuff that we're going to see from Jura, and we'll see more progress and improvements across the rest of the range in future, like what we've seen from the 10-year-old and that 14-year-old rye cask. So thank you all for watching. Let me know what you think of Jura. If you've tried any of the recent releases, do you think that there's been improvements as well? And what do you think of these cask finished duty-free or duty-free-esque releases? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.